Radio Retrofuture has been made possible by the Groene Vee absinthe, some of the best artisanal absinthe from the Netherlands. You can find their selections of homemade absinthe, both white and green, on degroenevee.nl/en, or click the link down in the description.
Radio Retrofuture.
Yeah, we're already 5 minutes in. So, yes, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new episode number 70 of Radio Retrofuture. And today I have Raquel Byrnes. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
It's Burns, yeah.
Oh, Byrne. Okay. So, yeah, today an offer of how many books have you written until now?
This will be my 8th and 6th, 7th, and 8th books. I have 5 that are already published.
Because you have written a number of trilogies, like the Shades of Hope series, the Noble Islands mystery series, the books of Blackburn Chronicles. Is that all of them, or are there more?
No, that's it. The Blackburn Chronicles is the trilogy that's coming out in January, and it's the Steampunk trilogy.
Right.
So I'm really excited about that.
All right. Is this your first Steampunk trilogy?
I've always been a fan of that genre or that aesthetic, so I have read other steampunk, and I'm a huge fan of, Wells and, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and all of those types of kind of pre-steampunk type of stories. And something happened in my personal life. My daughter was and they chose steampunk as the theme. So I was already very, very deep in research when I started the book. So a personal connection.
Right. Okay. So before we go into your current work, how did you start with writing? What inspired that?
I think I always wrote. One of my earlier memories was I went to go see the Nutcracker ballet. Are you familiar with that? It comes out in Christmas.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the Nutcracker.
Yeah, and it's a story about this young girl who goes on this adventure, and she's. It was one of the first times that it ever dawned on me when I was a child that as a girl I could go on an adventure. I didn't have to be, a big tough guy. So I started writing stories in which I went on an adventure as me, not some other person, but as me. So that just kind of started the writing bug, and I've been writing ever since. I've been writing all through high school and college. So.
Mm-hmm. And what was your first writing exercise? Did you start with short stories, or did you go for big book-esque stories right away?
I started writing a book right away. I actually wrote a trilogy that never got published because it was so terrible. But it was a really great way to learn how to write is by actually writing the book. And I ended up writing 3 in the series and kind of took those around and got a lot of really great feedback from crit groups and, editors and stuff. And just went from there. Chose topics and subjects that I love to read, and so I just wrote books that I would like to read.
Are you a full-time writer, or do you also have a normal job?
Well, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I have 6 kids, so that's a full-time job in and of itself.
Yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
My only employment is I'm a full-time author.
Is the situation in the United States that way that a writer can live off being a full-time author if you're moderately successful?
Yeah, I think the key, and a lot of authors will tell you this, that actually the key to doing that or to going in that direction is to have a backlist. So more than one book that people, if they find what you're writing and they enjoy it, then they have other things to choose from, and then you end up having readers that you can communicate with and talk back and forth about characters and see different places. So
in what year did you start writing?
Let's see, my
professionally, I mean, or semi-professionally, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
started to, in earnest, professionally start a blog and a website and go with my little business cards, I think in about 2008. Got an agent in 2010, and he sold the books in 2011. So about professionally where that's my career goal.
Do you think there is a difference in, let's say, how writers in the 2000s promoted their own work?
Yeah,
Change, you think?
there's a huge difference. I think also your comment about how it's very different in the United States, agents and whatnot. I am noticing that there's a huge shift going on in the publishing industry, and a lot of authors are actually themselves more towards a hybrid career where they go through boutique publishers or self-publishing, or they go through traditional publishing, depending on what they need at the moment, what they needs at that time. So I think there's a lot more freedom coming down the pike, and I think it's probably modeled by things going on overseas.
We already talked a little bit about agents. What's the role of the agent going to be in the future, you think?
I'm hearing a lot of things where agents are expanding their skill set to include helping to get things digitally ready. So you're going to have agents that come alongside and help with the digiting part of publishing, the formatting, the all of the online things, the networking and thinking different things like that, because their role's changing. And there's also publishing houses that are breaking apart or getting rid of imprint. So it's kind of scattered right now. I don't know. I do know they have to change what they do in order to
stay relevant,
keep offering what clients need. Yeah.
Okay, well, what would you suggest to people who are new, who are considering writing books? Should they go look for an agent, or is self-publishing the way of the
I think you should finish your book first.
Okay.
I've met so many people in conferences and stuff that want to write a book and have like maybe the first 3 chapters done really well because they enter contests or they send them out to agents or whatever, but they don't have concept. Is it going to be a multi-volume series? Is it just a standalone book? Finishing your book is key, and I think getting yourself involved in a writing community is really important, because that's where you hear the most honest feedback on your work, or people that you work with all the time. It's like such and such a boutique, such and such a publisher is looking for this type of short story or this type of thing. So that also helps you as well.
But let's talk a little bit about your work. What was your first set of books, your first trilogy?
My first trilogy was called Shades of Hope, and they were connected simply by the color in the title, but they were suspense. So there's like a romantic suspense. So there's like a whole backstory with a person going back. In the first book, The Purple Knot, the main character's best friend is killed mysteriously, and she's actually a private detective. So she goes back to her hometown that she fled to go and find out what happened with her best friend. And so you kind of go back to this stressful situation with her and go on this thrilling adventure with her as well. And so that was a lot of. So the other books are also mysteries with romance, and they have colors in the title. So the second one was Ruby Dawn, and that one actually got translated to The Streets of San Diego in Germany because it takes place in San Diego.
All right. And finally, the second one, which one was that again? The Noble Island Mystery Series?
Oh, the Gothic.
Yeah.
Well, I've always been a fan of Victoria Holt and Daphne du Maurier. They write Gothic mysteries, and the publisher that I was doing the first trilogy for, the Shades of Hope trilogy, they had started an imprint that was a little bit darker, and they were looking for Gothic mystery or Gothic romance, and they asked if I'd be interested because many people had branded my books kind of like edgy and edge of your seat type of books from the first trilogy, so they thought it would be a good fit. Two of those, it's a duology about these mysteries that take place on an imaginary island called Noble Island, but it's supposed to be among the islands off the coast of Washington State, where I lived for some time as a child, and where, you know, I remember fondly, but also they were kind of creepy and isolated. So I used those as a setting and part antagonist in the story. So that was a lot of fun to write that way.
Right. And finally, you made the step to steampunk for your Blackburn Chronicles. What inspired that? Was there a particular fiction or an event that triggered that?
Well, yeah, at the time, my daughter was on ASB, which is the Associated Student Council. It's for her high school. And they plan the prom, which is a huge dance at the end of the year that's formal with gowns and tuxedos and stuff. And the theme that she chose, because she was really into it, was steampunk. So I ended up helping her do a lot of research, and she made, you know, goggles and guns and, you know, like all these things. She had her corset. She had like the whole everything. She looked amazing, and, you know, the gas mask and stuff. And as I'm helping her, I'm looking at the things and I'm like, wow, what would be going on in the environment that they would need that? Or like, why would you need this? And I just got really into the whole lore of it. And it was such a positive experience that I wanted to try writing it. And it was kind of a natural transition from the Gothic mysteries, because you have to world build a lot in like Gothic mysteries, and a natural progression into sort of a science fiction fantasy type situation.
Right. And have you also approached members of the steampunk community, or did you go to steampunk conventions to learn more about it? How did you inform yourself?
I watched every documentary there was, every movie there was, and I do a lot of reading in the genre that interests me. So I had read All Protectorate, and I had read Bone Shaker, and I'd read a bunch of books in the genre just to kind of get a feel for the pace, like what was expected in terms of tone. So I wanted to get it true to the genre that I loved. So, and then here we have something called the Gas Lamp Quarter. It's in San Diego. It's about an hour from here, and they meet quite regularly. And you're welcome to go if you don't dress up. It's a social. They go and they rent out an entire restaurant, and everybody's dressed, and it's just, they have these formal teas and like teapot games, and it's just a lot of fun. And so it was nice to be able to go and see different community around steampunk, and it's one of the most artistic communities I've encountered, and they're very encouraging. So it's a really great experience, and got a lot of information. I was able to do the book, so I was really grateful.
Right. How would you say, you talked about things like pace, how would you say, let me rephrase that. What makes steampunk stories feel unique?
I think it's the spirit of wonder that is part of that whole genre. There seemed to be nothing that could, by a master plan and you know, attention to detail. It seemed like if there was nothing that you couldn't do. And I think because it was also, the books that I wrote are, steampunks traditionally tends to be in England or London, and being American and in a place that I was familiar with, so I wrote it in America. I wrote it in the East Coast, New York era. And during that time, there was a lot of just these titans of industry that really, really changed the course of our, based on these ideas that they had. So I just found it was honor, because even though it tends to be set in dystopians or places that are something has happened, you know, or there's, you know, almost like a darkness in the setting, extremely optimistic genre. It was really attractive to me.
Mhm. What was the most difficult adjustment to the style you were familiar with?
I think it was really, really difficult weaponry. I think because in the former books that I wrote, killer was a very traditional in the shadows kind of mystery, or there were car chases and gunfights and like bombs. Here, I actually spent so much time designing weapons that were like that, and it was so fun. And my main character, she's a maker, she's a tinkerer, and she's had been for years because her father was. And she makes this, but she's a girl, she's a debutante in a very, in high society, and so her weapons kind of reflect her sensibilities. And she has something called the Shrieking Violet, actually a grenade that you throw, and it lets out this huge shriek and this violent gas because it mixes magnesium and iron and stuff. But it was still, based on a flower design. So it was really, really fun. It's very deadly, beautiful, and effective. So it's fun to draw and also explain and research those types of weapons.
Mm-hmm. Did you also actually make drawings of those weapons?
I did. I have a few of them posted on my website, and I will be posting some later. But yeah, I had to sketch. The Shrieking Violet is a cluster of metal spheres that have glass inside, 2 glass capsules. So you have to crush it and throw it in order for it to work. And so I had to work out the logistics of that. And there's also these discs that you twist, and when you push the button, spin, so it's like a buzzsaw, and then you throw it. Fun to kind of work those out, but I had to have them on paper because I didn't have any in actual existence. So.
Because you are a veteran of multiple genres, I don't remember when these were written. I think they must have been somewhere around 2014, where a lot of I think they were from mostly writers who didn't want to be associated with the steampunk genre anymore. I guess because, if I remember correctly, because of its pulpy nature, so to speak. And I can imagine there were also a lot of new writers that started to get invested in that genre, so you also had that. What is your opinion on that? Is the steampunk genre something that is being taken seriously at this point, or is there a renewed effort by serious writers?
I've noticed in television here in the States and in movies coming out, projected movie things, when you hear what's coming down the pike, there are a lot of steampunk-esque type of things where they have like nods to the genre. They'll have, whether it's the type of like collapsing metal, uniforms or weaponry that they have, or where it's almost like a gritty kind of mechanical aesthetic. But I am seeing a lot of it, and I've had conversations with people whether or not it's homage to steampunk or appropriation of steampunk. There seems to be a lot of varying opinions on what that is, but I'm happy to see it. I'm happy to see it out there. When I started writing the books 3 years ago, I would say, yeah, I'm going to write a steampunk, thriller, and they're like, what? Like, some people don't know what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just didn't know what it was called. And then when you like explain to them or give them different types of examples, they're like, oh yeah, I love that. So I think it's good it's getting exposure.
What I noticed with steampunk productions, because I've started on my new series, Steampunkish, where I have various steampunk media, I realized a lot of these steampunk projects failed hard. And most of them failed due to corporate meddling, and it's really interesting that saw some reviews of Treasure Planet by Walt Disney, which was a passion project by the same people who made Aladdin and stuff like that. But they made those movies with the idea they could finally make Treasure Planet, and but Disney didn't want any of it. So yeah, they finally allowed him to make Treasure Planet, and then they let it die because Disney didn't.
I really liked it, and it was a really, really great treatment of
yeah.
a well-known story.
Yeah, but Disney let it die. Another game that I reviewed on Steampunk is Rise of Legends. People love the game, but it doesn't get republished.
No. Oh, the BioShock Infinite did well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the few games that, the few products that remain successful. But there's another series, Lost Exile, one of my favorite anime. And they made, and that one got, it was supposed to go on for 2 seasons, but that got canned. It only got 1 season, so the second half of the first season is like, like a freight train. And then they did a 10th anniversary season, and I frigging hated it.
Why do you think they're doing that? You're saying it's corporate intervention, but what do you think it? Are they watering down the aesthetic? Are they not presenting?
Oh, no. The thing is that I feel that a lot of things are passion projects by the creator. And so you've got a team that's very dedicated to make the project a success. But it's not what I feel the top has in mind. They want things that are familiar, and the thing with Steampunk is it's very unique, often in its approach to story, also visual storytelling. So the top doesn't want to see that succeed, because that means if it would succeed, it means they got to make more of it.
That would be really nice.
Yeah. So I think it's a lot of passionate people trying to push the project through, and people on the top who don't want that to happen, but that have to allow it. So I think it's a lot of clashing of egos. Kind of the same story what you saw with Ghostbusters 2. 2 people at the top that really wanted this movie to be the way it became, and actors that were very unwilling to actually work on the project because it was an empty shell of a movie in their mind. So
I didn't see that, but I heard so many people were not happy. It wasn't what they thought it was going to be. I remember loving the first movie. The first movie was hilarious. We always quoted the one-liners.
Yeah, it's
that
particular movie is a story. It will not be remembered for its merits. It will be remembered for all the drama behind the scene.
That's too bad.
Yeah. And for some reason, Steampunk, a lot of large Steampunk projects like Rise of Legends was a brilliant game. It was wonderful. It had a future. And it didn't. And nobody really understands why. I mean, Rise of Nations, I played the original Rise of Nations, which it's a good game. It's not bad, but it's rather boring compared. And then you have Rise of Nations, what's basically the same game. It's refined in its gameplay, but it
had a better story, though. Not only was it visually beautiful, it had a better storyline. I think that's the big difference. Yeah. You can't just slap gears on something and say it's steampunk. There has to be that.
Yeah, I want to make a Steampunk episode on the story, because the unique thing about Rise of Nations, we're kind of geeking out on the video game now, but hey, who cares? Rise of Nations is a game you just need to play the campaign without knowing anything about the factions, knowing anything about the world. You just need to play it and let it come over you like you would watch a movie, I think. And when you look at the maps, for example, it's just wonderful how the units are animated. And because it's the animation is a little dated, however, when you have those clockwork robots walking, because of their little bit jittery movement, it's like stop motion.
Yeah, I think it adds to it, and also the strategy that it's involved with, that I think keeps people hooked. You have so much invested in your campaigns, so
yeah, because when I played it, like it was again 2004, so I played it over a decade later, and when I really looked at the story, it's actually kind of bland. However, the world building itself is freaking amazing. I just wish they did something differently with the Elite, with the magical faction. Because although the units are animated well, they are very generic.
Yeah. Yeah. When I went to go write the Steampunk trilogy, one of the things that I wanted to make sure when I was building the world was that I didn't want to just slap gears on it and then just tell a normal story. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. I wanted everything that I created within that world to have purpose. So if they wore goggles, it was because they needed them because they were higher up in the floating city,
yeah.
or if they went out into the wastelands where there was noxious vapors and strange creatures, they had the face masks and the goggles and the armor, and they had the tracer guns and all the different things. So I wanted there to be purpose behind the accoutrements of steampunk, not just because I think it's more authentic when there's a reason why science and technology went in that direction in your story.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's one of my main issue with especially costuming, but mainly costuming, as we call drawings of characters, also costuming. People have this stereotypical view of steampunk, which is the Victorians in brown, basically, or goths in brown, as a lot of people call it. I think the community itself evolved past that point now. That people are now encouraging, let's use more color, let's use different cultures and aesthetics, and we've got South Africa has its own version of steampunk, and I'm sure places like Taiwan, they will develop their own flavors of steampunk. And
there's some amazing Asian steampunk animes and stories out there, and their aesthetic is flavored with all of their history, and I think it makes it richer. When we add that to our own.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I had a whole conversation with somebody from Taiwan last week, and I'll talk a little bit. I'll talk about how do they view a post-colonial culture, and it's really surprising. I thought a lot of things he said was really very surprising.
Like what?
Well, for example, there is this movement in Indonesia, and my family comes from Indonesia, so I have a somewhat of a connection with that. And there is this movement, if I'm allowed to call it a movement, I'm not really sure. I hope to speak to one of these people that are active in that scene. It's called Pleziran Tempo Dulu. It means something like pleasure trip through time, roughly translated. And this is young Indonesians dressing up like Dutch colonials. And then they use terms like mevrouw, which is Dutch for madame, and stuff like this. So they use these Indonesian people in Western dress going on their gazelle bikes, cycling through the streets of Jakarta. And they go to visit, dressed like that, all these old colonial buildings. They are active in restoring these buildings, make sure they're functional again and don't deteriorate.
Oh, that's great.
So, yeah,
they have a whole subculture going then.
Yeah,
there.
they've got an entire subculture based around post-colonial, the Dutch colonials.
That is so interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, I've got 2 videos on it. One of them is actually about South Africa. The other one is the interview with this student who lives in Taiwan but comes from Indonesia, and he is very active in discovering his family history, because I think it was his grandfather grew up in a Dutch family when they were still living there.
Oh, that's so interesting. I liked your videos, especially the ones that kind of break down steampunk and explain the different aspects of it. I think that's really helpful.
That's kind of the point, and I also try to talk about its critics, because I think there's plenty of criticize. Unfortunately, a lot of the criticism is ideologically based, so it doesn't really talk about steampunk, but it does talk about what their ideology prefers it to be, or not to be at all. So that's something I'm working on, but. Getting back on the topic of, I think we were talking about post-colonialism, is that, there's a great, what you expect, especially from the Dutch. And we as the Dutch are taught we should be ashamed of our colonial history. right?
Mm.
And it's not
Mhm.
like we did a lot of bad things over there. However, we also did a lot of things that the people are now benefiting from today. Like roads and the bridges. Most of the bridges, now I won't say most of the bridges, but for a long time, all the bridges in Indonesia were Dutch built. And
Oh, I didn't know that.
they were constructed by Dutch engineers. Well, built by the local populace, of course, as laborers.
Mhm.
But yeah, and it's quite sad to see. A matter of fact, I've gone there to Manado, Sulawesi, the island chain
Mhm.
of Sulawesi, and it's
Mhm.
quite sad to see back then, we're talking about the 90s, I think. Quite sad to see the state of repair of many of those places because they didn't have the knowledge anymore to maintain. Also,
Oh.
we had the Suhartos, the clan that ruled Indonesia for
Mhm.
after the decolonization, and they tried to hide that past, that you were not allowed to talk about it.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Do you
that
feel like this movement is doing something positive? They're embracing the positive contributions
yeah, yeah. I asked
with
him
the
that.
restoration and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And he admitted that they are emphasizing the positive aspects of the colonization, but it's not like they are ignorant of the bad things. But it's not
Right.
something like, this is our country, this is ours now, and
Mhm.
this is part of our history, so we have to take care of it. So this
Yeah.
whole, like, a lot of people have this mentality these days that they should be victims, right? Bad
Mhm.
things happened to their ancestors in the past, and now they have to feel like victims for that. And they project that as well on these well, these other countries, the second world, so to speak. And
Mm.
these people over there, on the other hand, are like, yeah, this is ours now, and we're gonna we're gonna use it. And depending on the country you speak of course, this past, how they dealt with the past, like Taiwan has always been in maintaining their colonial buildings that the French built,
Mm.
and it's something they cherish. It's no
Mhm.
coincidence. I don't know why this is, but somehow the Victorian English seem to have developed a sense of style that appeals to these people as much as it appeals to us.
Mhm. Mm.
How did
Mhm.
they do that? I don't know. Um, but maybe it is because it has been a dominant culture around the world for such a long time. And
Maybe. I mean, there was a time when the sun didn't set on the English Empire
oh yeah,
at all. Their reach was vast, and I think particularly in steampunk stories or steampunk books, the very proper, controlled understanding of what's required of you, etiquette of that kind of English etiquette, is a really, really stark contrast to very often what the outside world looks like in those stories. It's very often chaotic, changing. The country is fluid. The government is untrustable. So I think niceties and the understanding of one's place, it tends to be a good starting point in those stories. And very often I find, though, that being free of those things
hmm
or find them confining. But initially, I could see how the order in that chaotic realm would be a comforting thing.
Well, it's the BBC version of the Victorian era. That's why I compare steampunk to pop culture.
Mm,
I mean, it's not so much the Victorian era that they're interested in; it's the pop culture version of the Victorian
yeah,
era,
yeah,
and we see,
that's true.
yeah,
Because you don't have uh, in like young adult and more contemporary treatments of the steampunk story, the type of behavior and thinking that would occur to a Victorian girl is really, really different than like what Katniss would think
yeah,
in
exactly.
her in her world. So, but yeah, I think it is the idealized version of
hmm
Victorian
Yeah.
society that's used.
Yeah.
You know, the pretty, proper, witty part of it.
Yeah, I think some people compare the past like looking at a foreign country, and I think that's true for a large part. Like we cannot delve into the mind of, I don't know, the average person in the Middle East, and how he thinks. We don't understand that, like, or political views.
Well, we don't.
Oh, go
We
ahead.
don't have their frame of reference. We
Yeah.
don't have their understanding of, you know, just even their territory, their country, and their culture and their expectations on themselves from society. So yeah, we don't have that frame of reference.
Yeah. So I think, well, especially when you're making writing a story, you want the fish out of water, right? A character you can relate to, but is also new in the world, so everything looks new to him, but you recognize his point of view.
Yeah, that's why I chose the character that I chose for my trilogy for the Tremblers. She's a debutante. She's a proper lady in society, and they are protected by this giant Tesla dome that blankets the city of Manhattan and keeps out all of the that happened. And the book starts 10 years after this giant series of earthquakes just shattered all of North America. America almost fell. What rose in its place was 13 city-states that are ruled by these ruthless governors. And all of this control and all of this fear, it keeps her in this one place until something happens to her father. He's abducted, and there's these strange creatures that are attacking people, and she's thrown into this whole, literally out of her safe world and into everything that's out there, everything that's been hidden from her. And I thought that someone who is at her point in life where she doesn't know what she wants to do, she feels constrained with society, but she also is really inexperienced and really kind of naive, to kind of see the world through her eyes. And it was a really interesting journey.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's a hard topic, especially because the whole story on post-colonialism has been so politicized. But it's something I do want to talk about because I find it very interesting. And I do hope to meet somebody from Indonesia that's involved in the Pleasurean Tempo Dulu movement to see their point. But what he told me, the whole matter is a very... there's a generational gap between the people that actually experienced the colonial era and those that didn't. Now the people that experienced it are dying. So there's that thing going on, and also, especially in Indonesia, they are split as well. And I noticed this especially when I was there because my grandmother was still alive and she spoke fluent Malaysia. And my grandmother is lily white, so we kind of stood out there in the crowd. So we were there were these young girls that were constantly touching me because they wanted to know what white skin felt like. So that was quite weird. And also, you know, they're used to touching one another, so that's really weird for somebody from the Western world. And
yeah, we have a big personal bubble.
Yeah, we do. It's true. However, I remember how these people looked up to my grandmother. Because, you know, she was a link to the past, and when you're old in Indonesia, you're already revered in a kind of way. And I remember we were staying at this bed and breakfast. This was this old colonial house.
How nice!
Yeah, and there was this older woman, and she was so fond of my grandmother. You know, she was the hostess, and she was. If she had time to be around my grandmother, she would be there. It was quite amazing.
That's sweet.
So there's a really big split between the population as well. So it's really interesting, but I'm sure that the Asia, how it happened in Asia, is very different from especially Africa.
Yeah, Africa. And also, we dealt with colonization a little different here in the States as well. So,
Yeah, so it's, yeah. Yeah, well, I hope I get to speak to somebody about that subject from Africa or South Africa at some point as well. That would be very interesting.
I wonder if there's like there should be a world kind of SteamCon convention where you can meet people that countries take on that and why they would do it based on their history, like the Indonesia and the post-colonization, and staying to talk with them.
Yeah, well, you have to do with Radio Retrofuture till that point, I'm afraid. But it is most certainly a panel I'm interested in organizing. The problem is making the contacts within those areas. I've got someone in Taiwan who now sends me regularly pieces, and he also brought me in contact with Sebastian, who was the student I talked about. So yeah, I hope to. I already had some people from South America on, who the guys who are working on the Dystopia Argentina movie. Don't know if you're.
Oh yeah, I have heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had them on my show, so that was really nice. Unfortunately, I screwed up the recording, so.
Oh no!
I also promised to make a review. However, I'm too busy with the Fallout music station I'm working on currently, so. But I have to do that at some point.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to write good critiques of people I know. But
are you too nice?
Yeah, well, I like to be kind. I like to lampoon things,
Oh no!
I made a review of a musical video clip by The Eternal Frontier. And I did that as Dankert, and I lampooned that video, calling Santa an authoritarian dictator, and making an entire conspiracy behind the video. So, yeah.
Are you gonna release that, or is that already out?
It's already released, actually, and I intended to repost it on Christmas Day, because I believe it deserves way more videos than it got. I mean, it has a Terminator Rudolph in there, so if that doesn't get your attention, I don't know what will.
Yes,
but
I know.
I'll send you the link after we're done.
Yes, please do.
Speaking of which, we're already 50 minutes in. So, tell us a little bit about when your book will be released and how people can support your work.
The Blackburn Chronicles is the name of the series. The first book that's releasing on January 19th is called The Tremblers, and then there's the Chasm Walkers are releasing right now. The Tremblers is on pre-order at Amazon, and if you go on my website on Twitter at Raquel Byrnes, you can get 2 free downloaded. 2 novellas that have to do with the whole series, so you can kind of get a taste of the world and the adventure, and check out the book as well.
So do you have some final words of inspiration for the audience?
For the audience. Keep being creative. It's such an amazing world, and keep encouraging one another in it, because it really is a wonderful community. I've been really welcomed by it. So. All
right. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna leave it at this. I'm sure Raquel will be back at some point, maybe for the Anachronistic Society. I think that would be fun.
That would be fun.
Oh yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I bid you adieu, and make it your way. Good night.
7, 8, hit it!